The obese girl was traded for a sack of flour. The mountain man freed her with a wagon of gold. The winter of 1876 descended upon Dust Vale like a cruel fist clenching the throat of the Wyoming Territory. Snow fell in sheets so thick that the Absaroka Mountains disappeared behind walls of white, and the wind howled through the narrow streets like wolves crying for blood. The small frontier town, never prosperous even in good times, now teetered on the edge of starvation. Clara May Whitford stood in the center of the market square, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Her worn dress, patched and repatched, strained against her large frame. Around her, the townspeople gathered like vultures circling carrion, their faces pinched with hunger and twisted with malice. She kept her eyes downcast, fixed on the frozen mud beneath her feet, trying to disappear into herself the way she had learned to do since childhood. "1 sack of flour," her father's voice rang out, slurred with drink even at this early hour. "And a pound of salt. That's all I'm asking for her." Laughter erupted from the crowd, sharp, cutting laughter that sliced through the winter air like knives. Clara's cheeks burned despite the cold. She had known this moment was coming, had seen it in her father's eyes for weeks now as their food stores dwindled and his desperation grew. But knowing hadn't prepared her for the humiliation of standing here, being traded like livestock. No, worse than livestock. Livestock had value. "Henry Whitford, you've finally lost what little sense the Lord gave you," old Mrs. Patterson called out, her voice dripping with contempt. "Who'd want to feed that girl? She'd eat through a winter's stores in a month." More laughter. Clara's fingernails dug into her palm so hard she felt skin break. She thought of her mother, dead these 5 years now, and wondered if she was watching from heaven. She hoped not. She hoped her mother couldn't see what her daughter had become, a burden so heavy that her own father would sell her for flour. "I'll take her," came a voice from the back of the crowd. It belonged to Marcus Grimm, who ran the general store. He was a thin man with a calculating face and cold eyes. "But not for flour. I'll give you half a sack and 2 bottles of whiskey. She can work in the storeroom, moving crates and such. God knows she's built for heavy labor." The crowd murmured its approval. Clara's father's eyes lit up at the mention of whiskey. She felt something break inside her chest, something that had been cracking for years, but had somehow held together until this moment. Her father was about to speak, about to accept, when another voice cut through the cold air. "No!" The single word carried such weight that the entire square fell silent. The crowd parted, and through the gap walked a man Clara had seen only once before, months ago, when he'd come down from the mountains to trade furs. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with long gray hair tied back and a beard that reached his chest. His buckskin coat was worn but well made, and his eyes, pale blue like winter ice, seemed to see everything. Silas Boone, the mountain man, the ghost of the Absaroka Range. "The girl's not for sale," Silas said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who expected to be obeyed. Clara's father stepped forward, emboldened by drink and desperation. "Now see here, stranger, this is my daughter, and if I say she's for sale, then you're trading in human flesh," Silas interrupted, "which makes you no better than the slavers we fought a war to stop." He moved closer, and Clara saw that he carried a leather satchel over one shoulder. "But if you're determined to do this, let's at least make it worth everyone's time." He dropped the satchel on the ground between them. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed across the square. When he untied the strings and opened it, Clara heard the collective gasp of the crowd. Inside, gleaming in the pale winter sunlight, was gold, nuggets and dust, more than Clara had ever seen in her life. "There's enough here to buy your daughter's freedom 10 times over," Silas said. "Enough to feed you through this winter and the next. Enough to choke on if that's your inclination." He looked at Marcus Grimm. "And enough to buy out your entire store, if need be." The silence that followed was absolute. Clara stared at the gold, unable to comprehend what was happening. Why would anyone, let alone a stranger, do this for her? She looked up at Silas Boone's face, searching for mockery or some hidden cruelty, but found only a deep, old sadness in his eyes. "I don't understand," her father stammered. She's nothing special. Why would you—" "Because no one," Silas said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "deserves to be traded for a sack of flour. No one deserves to be sold by their own blood. And because I have gold and no one to spend it on, so I might as well spend it on something that matters." He picked up the satchel and handed it to Clara's father, who took it with shaking hands. Then Silas turned to Clara herself. "You don't have to come with me," he said quietly. "That gold bought your freedom, not your servitude. You can stay in town, find your own way, or you can come up the mountain, learn to live free, and decide your own future. Your choice." Clara looked at her father, who was already peering into the satchel, his eyes wide with greed. She looked at the townspeople, their faces showing a mixture of shock, envy, and that familiar contempt. She looked at Marcus Grimm, who was calculating how much of that gold he could swindle from her drunken father. Then she looked at Silas Boone and saw something she'd never seen directed at her before: respect. "I'll come with you," she whispered. The journey up the mountain took 3 days. Silas had 2 horses, a sturdy roan for himself and a gentle mare for Clara. He didn't speak much during the climb, only pointing out landmarks and warning her when the path grew treacherous. Clara appreciated the silence. It gave her time to think, to process what had happened, to wonder what kind of life awaited her. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was nothing like she'd expected. It wasn't the rough shack she'd imagined, but a solid structure built of thick logs, with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they approached, Clara realized someone had been tending the fire. "My neighbor stops by when I'm gone," Silas explained, dismounting. "Make sure the place doesn't freeze solid." He helped Clara down from her horse with surprising gentleness. "Come on, let's get you warm." Inside, the cabin was sparse but comfortable. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking pot hanging over glowing embers. There were 2 rooms, the main living area and a smaller bedroom separated by a thick curtain. Furs covered the floor, and shelves lined the walls, filled with supplies and tools. "You'll take the bedroom," Silas said, moving to stoke the fire. "I'll sleep out here. There's a trunk in there with some clothes that might fit you. They belong to—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "They belong to someone who doesn't need them anymore." Clara wanted to ask who, but something in his expression stopped her. Instead, she said, "Thank you for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Silas turned to look at her, the firelight casting shadows across his weathered face. "You don't owe me anything. That gold was payment for your freedom, nothing more. What you do with that freedom is your own business. He moved to the shelves and began pulling down food, dried meat, beans, flour. But if you want to stay here through the winter, I can teach you things, how to survive up here, how to be self-sufficient. Come spring, you can decide if you want to go back down the mountain or make your own way elsewhere. What if I want to stay? The words tumbled out before Clara could stop them. Silas paused in his work. Then you stay, he said simply. Like I said, it's your choice. Always your choice from now on. That night, lying in the bedroom on a bed stuffed with pine needles and covered with warm furs, Clara cried. But for the first time in years, they weren't tears of shame or pain. They were tears of relief, of disbelief, of something that felt dangerously close to hope. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Silas woke before dawn each morning and started the fire. He taught Clara how to check the trap lines he'd set around the cabin, how to skin and prepare the animals they caught, how to read the sky for coming storms. He showed her which plants could be eaten even in winter, how to melt snow for water without wasting fuel, how to maintain the tools they depended on. Clara learned quickly. Her body, which had always been mocked in town, proved well suited to the hard work of mountain life. She could haul wood for hours without tiring, could carry heavy loads of supplies, could work the bellows of the small forge Silas kept for repairing tools. And slowly, as the weeks passed, she felt herself changing. Not in body, that remained the same, but in spirit. The shame that had weighed on her all her life began to lift, replaced by a growing sense of capability and worth. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Silas began to talk. It was the first time he'd volunteered information about himself. "I had a wife once," he said, staring into the flames. "Her name was Silver Dove. She was Shoshone. We met during the war. I was scouting for the Union, and her tribe was trying to stay neutral, keep their people safe from both sides." He paused, his hands gripping his knees. "She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, not just her face, but her spirit. She was kind and fierce all at once, smart as a whip, could track better than any man I knew." Clara sat quietly, afraid to interrupt. "We married in her tribe's tradition," Silas continued, "built this cabin together, planned to raise a family here, away from the madness of the world. For 5 years, we were happy. Then," his voice cracked, "then I made the mistake of taking her down to a settlement to trade. Some men, white men, drunk and mean, they decided they didn't like seeing an Indian woman treated as an equal to a white man's wife. They waited until I was in the trading post, then they—" He stopped, unable to continue. "You don't have to tell me," Clara said softly. "They killed her," Silas forced out. "Beat her to death in the street while the townspeople watched. By the time I got there, it was too late. I killed the men responsible, shot 3 of them dead, hanged the 4th myself from a tree in the town square. Then I took Silver Dove's body back up the mountain and buried her in our favorite meadow." Tears streamed down his weathered face. "That was 15 years ago. I haven't been back to civilization since, except to trade when I absolutely have to. I spent years blaming myself. If I hadn't taken her down there, if I'd been faster, if I'd never met her at all, she'd still be alive." Clara moved closer to him. "It wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" Silas looked at her, his eyes haunted. "I brought her into a world that hated her for what she was, just like your father tried to sell you for what you are. When I saw you in that market square, saw the way they looked at you, talked about you like you weren't even human. I saw Silver Dove. I saw every person who's ever been judged and found wanting for things they can't control." He wiped his eyes roughly. "That gold I gave your father, it's from a cache Silver Dove and I found together years ago. We planned to use it to build a bigger house, maybe help her people when they needed it. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It felt like blood money. But when I saw you there, I realized maybe this was what it was meant for all along, to buy someone's freedom, to give someone a chance Silver Dove never got." Clara felt tears running down her own cheeks. Without thinking, she reached out and took Silas's hand. He gripped it like a drowning man gripping a rope. Winter deepened, but inside the cabin warmth grew, not just from the fire, but from the quiet companionship that developed between Clara and Silas. They fell into an easy partnership. She handled the indoor work and close-range trapping, while he ventured out for longer hunting trips. When he returned, sometimes days later, Clara would have hot food waiting and the cabin in perfect order. But it was more than just practical cooperation. They talked, really talked, in a way Clara had never experienced before. Silas taught her to read better, using old books he'd collected over the years. She discovered a love for poetry, especially Wordsworth and Whitman. Silas would listen to her read aloud while he carved or repaired equipment, occasionally commenting on a particular passage. "I am large, I contain multitudes," Clara read one evening from Whitman's Song of Myself. She paused, looking up. "Do you think that's true? That we're all more than what we seem?" Silas looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "I think most people never get the chance to find out what they contain. They're told what they are from the day they're born, and they believe it. You were told you were worthless. I was told I was just a mountain savage. Silver Dove was told she was inferior because of her blood. But up here, away from all those voices, you get to discover who you really are." "And who do you think I am?" Clara asked, her heart beating faster. Silas met her eyes. "I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. Not just in body, though you're that too, but in spirit. You survived years of cruelty and came out the other side with your kindness intact. That takes strength most people don't have." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't feel strong. Half the time I still feel like that girl in the market square waiting to be sold." "That's because healing takes time," Silas said. "You can't expect years of wounds to close in a few months." "But they will close, Clara. I promise you that. And when they do, you'll realize just how remarkable you are." As winter gave way to early spring, Clara began to notice changes in herself. Not physical ones. Her body remained as it had always been, but internal transformations. She walked taller. She spoke with more confidence. She no longer flinched when Silas moved near her, no longer waited for criticism or mockery that never came. And she began to feel something else, something she'd never expected to feel toward anyone: love. It started small, a warmth in her chest when Silas smiled at something she said, a quickening of her pulse when their hands accidentally touched, a fierce protectiveness when he returned from hunting trips with new scars or bruises. She tried to suppress it, telling herself it was gratitude, nothing more. Silas was old enough to be her father. He still loved his dead wife. He'd saved her out of mercy, not attraction. But the feeling grew anyway, stubborn as mountain grass pushing through snow. One afternoon in early April, they were working together to repair the cabin's roof, which had sustained damage from the heavy snows. Clara was on the ground, passing up materials while Silas straddled the peak, hammering new shingles into place. "Hand me another bundle," he called down. Clara grabbed the bundle of shingles and started up the ladder. Halfway up, her foot slipped on a rung still slick with morning frost. She felt herself falling backward, the ground rushing up to meet her, and then strong arms caught her. Silas had slid down the roof and grabbed her, taking her weight against his chest. For a moment, they stayed frozen like that, Clara cradled against him, his arms around her. She could feel his heart beating fast and strong. When she looked up, their faces were inches apart. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough. "Yes," she whispered. "Thanks to you. Always thanks to you." Something shifted in his expression. His eyes dropped to her lips, then quickly back up. "Clara, Don't," she said, surprising herself. "Don't apologize or explain or tell me all the reasons why this is wrong. Just, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, don't pretend you don't." Silas's jaw worked. "You're young enough to be my daughter." "I'm 24 years old. I've lived more pain in those years than most people live in a lifetime. I'm not a child." "You deserve someone your own age, someone without all my scars and ghosts." "I deserve," Clara said firmly, "to choose who I love, and I choose you, not because you saved me, but because of who you are, because you're kind and patient, and you see me as a person, not a burden, because when you look at me, I feel beautiful for the first time in my life." Silas closed his eyes. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "I lost Silver Dove, and it nearly destroyed me. If I let myself love you and something happened—" "Then you'd have loved," Clara interrupted. "Isn't that better than hiding up here alone, punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault?" He opened his eyes, and she saw tears there. "I'm too old for you." "Then teach me to be old, too," she said with a small smile. "You've taught me everything else." Silas laughed, a real laugh, the first she'd heard from him. Then, slowly, carefully, he lowered his head and kissed her. Spring blossomed across the mountain. The snow retreated, revealing meadows carpeted with wildflowers. Silas took Clara to Silver Dove's grave, a peaceful spot overlooking a valley where eagles nested. Clara placed flowers there and said a silent thank you to the woman she'd never met, the woman whose tragedy had somehow led to her own salvation. Their relationship deepened. Silas still slept in the main room. "We'll do this proper," he insisted, but they spent every waking moment together. He taught her to shoot, to ride better, to navigate by the stars. She taught him to laugh again, to see beauty in simple things, to believe he deserved happiness. One evening, in late May, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Silas said, "If I were a younger man, I'd marry you in that meadow down there, where the flowers bloom all summer. I'd build you a bigger house, give you a real life." Clara took his hand. "I don't need a bigger house. I don't need flowers or fancy ceremonies. I just need you, here, choosing me every day the way I choose you." Silas squeezed her hand. "I'm afraid I don't have many years left to give you." "Then give me the ones you have," Clara said. "That's enough." They might have gone on like that, building their quiet happiness in the mountains, if the past hadn't come calling. It was mid-June when they first saw the smoke. Silas was checking traps in the eastern woods when he spotted it, a thin column rising from the valley below. Not from Dust Vale, which lay to the south, but from the direction of the old mining camps. "Could be prospectors," he said that evening, his face troubled. "Or could be something else. I'll ride down tomorrow. Make sure it's nothing to worry about." But he never got the chance. They came in the night, 4 men on horseback, their faces covered with bandanas. Clara woke to the sound of splintering wood and Silas shouting. She ran from the bedroom to find the cabin door kicked in, 2 men wrestling Silas to the ground while a third leveled a pistol at her. "Well, well," came a horribly familiar voice, "look who's living high on the mountain." Her father stepped into the cabin, swaying slightly, a bottle in one hand. He was thinner than she remembered, his face more haggard, but the cruel glint in his eye was the same. "Spent all that gold yet, old man?" Henry Whitford sneered at Silas. "Funny thing about gold, makes a man careless with his tongue, especially when he's drunk. Been telling everyone in the territory about the mountain man who gave away a fortune for my fat daughter. Some men got to wondering, if he had enough gold to give away, how much might he have hidden up here?" "There's nothing here," Silas growled, still struggling against the men holding him. "That was all I had." "Liar!" Henry moved closer to Clara. She tried to back away, but the man with the gun grabbed her arm. "See, I got to thinking, why would anyone give up that much gold for her unless he had plenty more? And then I remembered all the stories about Silas Boone, the mountain man with the secret hoard. Thought I'd bring some friends up here to discuss it with you." "Let her go," Silas said, his voice deadly calm. "Whatever you want from me, she has nothing to do with it." "Oh, but she does," Henry said. "See, you made her valuable when you bought her. Now she's my leverage. You tell us where the gold is, we take it and leave. You refuse—" He pulled a knife from his belt. "Well, I already sold her once. Wouldn't bother me none to cut her up." What happened next occurred in a blur. Silas, with a roar of rage, somehow threw off the men holding him. He lunged for the rifle hanging above the fireplace, but one of the intruders shot him. The bullet caught Silas in the shoulder, spinning him around. He crashed into the table, blood spreading across his buckskin shirt. "No!" Clara screamed. She broke free from her captor and ran to Silas, dropping to her knees beside him. His face was pale, but his eyes were fierce. "The shotgun," he whispered, "under the bed." Clara looked up at her father and his companions. They were arguing among themselves, distracted. Slowly, she stood. "There is more gold," she said loudly. The men fell silent, turning to her. "I know where it is. I'll show you. Just let me bandage him first. Please." Henry considered this, then nodded. "Make it quick." Clara went to the bedroom, her heart pounding. She grabbed bandages from the shelf, then knelt beside the bed. Her fingers found the stock of the shotgun Silas kept there, loaded and ready. She wrapped it in the bandages, hiding it as best she could, then returned to the main room. As she knelt beside Silas again, pressing the bundled bandages to his wound, she whispered, "Trust me." His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded, almost imperceptibly. Clara worked slowly, deliberately, on the bandage. As she did, she positioned herself between Silas and the intruders. "The gold is buried outside," she said, keeping her voice steady. "In the meadow to the east, under a pile of stones. We can go at first light." "We'll go now," Henry said. "In the dark? Through woods you don't know? You'll break your necks before you find anything." Clara tied off the bandage. "Besides, I need to make sure he doesn't bleed to death, or you'll never know the exact spot." The men exchanged glances. Finally, Henry nodded. "Fine. But we take turns standing watch. Any tricks, and I cut his throat myself. The night stretched on like torture. Two men kept guard while the others slept. Clara sat beside Silas, changing his bandage regularly, the shotgun hidden beneath her skirts. They waited. Just before dawn, when the guard rotation changed, Clara made her move. As one man sat down and the other stood to wake his replacement, Clara pulled out the shotgun and fired. The blast took the standing man in the chest, throwing him backward. Before the seated man could react, Silas, who had been feigning unconsciousness, lunged forward and grabbed the rifle that had been propped against the wall. Despite his wounded shoulder, he brought it up and fired, dropping the second man. Chaos erupted. The other two men burst from the bedroom where they'd been sleeping. Clara fumbled to reload the shotgun, her hands shaking. One of the men tackled her, sending the gun skittering across the floor. She crashed into the table, pain exploding through her ribs. Silas shot the man who tackled Clara, but the rifle jammed. The last man, a scarred brute they called Dutch, raised his pistol, aiming at Silas's head. Clara, still on the floor, grabbed the only thing within reach, the cast-iron cooking pot that had fallen from the fireplace. With all her strength, she swung it into Dutch's knee. He screamed and went down, his shot going wild. Before he could recover, Silas was on him. Despite his injury, the mountain man fought with the ferocity of a wounded bear. They grappled for the gun, crashing into the furniture, destroying what the initial fight had left intact. Clara scrambled for the shotgun, finally getting her hands on it, but the two men were too entangled for her to shoot without hitting Silas. Then Dutch got his pistol free and fired. Silas jerked, but didn't stop. His hands found Dutch's throat and squeezed. The man's face turned purple, his struggles weakening, until finally he went still. Silas collapsed beside the body, blood spreading from a new wound in his side. Clara ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "Silas, stay with me." "One more," he gasped. "Your father." Clara spun around. In the chaos, she'd forgotten about Henry. She found him crouched by the door, a pistol in his shaking hand, pointed at her. "You ruined everything," he snarled. "My own daughter, turning on me, after everything I did for you, keeping you fed all those years." "You sold me," Clara said quietly. She was still holding the shotgun, but it wasn't loaded. Her father didn't know that. "You traded your own child for whiskey money." "You were never worth more than that," Henry spat. "Your mother knew it. That's why she drank herself to death, couldn't stand looking at what she'd birthed." Something inside Clara snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet finality of ice breaking. She saw her father clearly for the first time, not as the man who should have loved her, but as a weak, cruel coward who blamed everyone else for his failures. "You're right," she said. "I was never worth anything to you, but I'm worth something to him." She gestured to Silas. "And I'm worth something to myself. That's what you never understood. My value doesn't come from you." Henry's finger tightened on the trigger. Big words from a fat girl with an empty gun. "Did you think I couldn't tell it wasn't loaded? Did you think I was that stupid?" "No," Clara said. "I thought you were exactly that stupid." She threw the shotgun at him. Instinctively, Henry ducked and fired, but his shot went high. Clara used the distraction to grab the knife from Dutch's belt, the same knife her father had threatened her with earlier. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She lunged forward and drove it into her father's chest. Henry Whitford stared at her in shock. The pistol fell from his hand. He opened his mouth to speak, but only blood came out. Then he collapsed, dead, before he hit the floor. Clara stood over him, the bloody knife still in her hand, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no horror, just a vast emptiness where her fear of him used to be. She dropped the knife and turned to Silas. He was conscious, but fading. Clara dragged him to the bedroom, found clean bandages, and worked frantically to stop the bleeding. The bullet from Dutch's gun had gone through his side, painful and dangerous, but if she could prevent infection, survivable. For 3 days and nights, Clara fought for Silas's life. She cleaned his wounds with whiskey, changed his bandages constantly, forced water and broth down his throat when he was delirious with fever. She didn't sleep, didn't eat, barely left his side. The bodies of her father and his companions remained in the main room, frozen in death, while Clara waged war against it in the bedroom. On the 4th day, Silas's fever broke. He opened his eyes to find Clara slumped in a chair beside the bed, finally asleep. When he tried to sit up, the movement woke her. "You're alive!" she sobbed, throwing her arms around him. "I thought I'd lost you." "Takes more than a few bullets to kill an old bear like me," Silas said weakly. Then his expression darkened. "Your father?" "Dead. I killed him." Clara's voice was flat. "I killed my own father." Silas pulled her close. "You did what you had to do. He made his choices. You made yours. There's no shame in defending your life." But Clara couldn't stop shaking. The enormity of what had happened, what she'd done, crashed over her. She'd taken a life, her own father's life. No matter how terrible he'd been, that fact would stay with her forever. Spring turned to summer as Silas healed. They buried the bodies in the woods, not out of respect, but because they couldn't leave them to rot. Clara marked her father's grave with a simple wooden cross, though she never visited it. The violence had changed something between them. They were closer now, bound by shared trauma, but also more careful with each other. Clara had nightmares where she saw her father's face as the knife went in. Silas had nightmares where he couldn't save her. They would wake each other gently, hold each other in the dark, and wait for dawn. One morning in July, Silas led Clara to a section of the cabin's floor she'd never paid attention to. He pried up several boards, revealing a hollow beneath. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were dozens of leather pouches. "This is what your father was looking for," Silas said. "Gold that silver dove and I found years ago. There's enough here to buy half of Wyoming if I wanted. But what good has it done me? It couldn't save her. It couldn't stop your father. It's just metal in the ground." Clara stared at the fortune. "What are you going to do with it?" "That's what I've been thinking about," Silas said. "I told you once that I gave your father gold to buy your freedom. But freedom isn't just about not being owned. It's about having choices, about being able to shape your own life. Most people in this territory don't have that. They're trapped by poverty, by circumstances, by the cruelty of others." He looked at Clara. "I want to give them what I gave you, not freedom from slavery, though God knows some still need that, but freedom from desperation, freedom to choose." Clara understood immediately. The orphanage in Dust Vale, the families who are starving, the people like I was. "Exactly." Silas sat back on his heels. "But I can't just ride down there and hand out gold. They'd tear each other apart fighting over it. It needs to be done right, through proper channels. A fund, maybe, administered by someone trustworthy. Someone who understands what it's like to have nothing. Someone like me, Clara said softly. Silas nodded. If you're willing. I know asking you to go back down there after everything. I'll do it, Clara said. Not for them. For all the other girls standing in market squares being told they're worthless. For all the people who just need one person to tell them they matter. They spent the next month planning. Silas built a special wagon with a hidden compartment for the gold. They decided Clara would go alone. Silas's presence would raise too many questions, and his injuries, though healed, had left him weaker than before. Besides, this needed to be Clara's journey, her choice, her act of redemption. The night before she was to leave, they stood together in the meadow where Silver Dove was buried. The summer air was warm and sweet with the scent of wild flowers. If I were a younger man, Silas said, echoing his words from months before, I'd marry you right here, right now. Clara turned to face him. Then do it anyway. What? Marry me. Not legally. We can do that later if you want. But marry me here in front of the mountains and the stars and Silver Dove's spirit. Make me your wife in the way that matters. Silas's eyes glistened. Clara, I'm 53 years old. In 10 years, maybe 15, I'll be dead. You'll still be young enough to find someone else, to have a real life. This is my real life, Clara interrupted fiercely. You are my real life. I don't want someone younger or handsomer or easier. I want you, old scars, nightmares and all. I want every year, every month, every day you have left. And when you're gone, I'll have had a lifetime's worth of love, which is more than most people ever get. Silas pulled her close. Then yes, he whispered against her hair. 1,000 times, yes. They married themselves that night under the stars, with no witnesses but the mountains. They spoke vows they'd written themselves, promises of honesty, of kindness, of choosing each other every day. Then they returned to the cabin and consummated their marriage slowly, tenderly, each touch a conversation, each kiss a promise. The next morning, Clara loaded the wagon and prepared to leave. Silas had aged visibly over the past months, the violence and injury taking their toll, but his eyes were bright as he kissed her goodbye. Come back to me, he said. Always, she promised. The journey down the mountain took 2 days. Clara had time to think about what she would say, how she would present herself. The girl who'd left Dust Vale in shame would return as a woman with purpose. The change wasn't just internal. Months of hard work had turned her body into muscle and strength. She sat taller in the saddle, held the reins with confidence. When she rode into Dust Vale, people stopped and stared. They recognized her, but barely. This wasn't the meek, hunched girl they'd mocked. This was someone different, someone who met their stares without flinching. Clara went straight to the town's only bank, a small establishment run by a man named Thomas Garrett. He was honest, as frontier bankers went, and known for his fairness. "Miss Whitford," he said, surprised, "I heard that is, your father said—" "My father is dead," Clara said flatly. "He died trying to rob the man who bought my freedom. I killed him myself when he threatened my life." Garrett's eyes widened, but he nodded slowly. "I see. And what brings you here today?" Clara pulled out a leather pouch and set it on his desk. When she opened it, gold dust spilled out, gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. "I want to establish a fund for the orphanage, for families who can't feed their children, for anyone trapped by poverty and desperation. I want to hire you to administer it, to make sure the money goes where it's needed, not into the pockets of men like Marcus Grimm." Garrett stared at the gold. That's more than I make in 5 years. Where did you—" "It was given to me by the man who saved my life," Clara said. "He and his late wife found it years ago. Now he wants to use it to save other lives. Will you help?" For 3 weeks, Clara worked with Garrett to establish the fund. They hired a teacher for the school, arranged for regular food deliveries to struggling families, and set up a system where people could apply for help without judgment or shame. Clara personally visited the orphanage, a grim building where thin children stared at her with hollow eyes. "You're going to be all right now," she told them. "You matter. You all matter. And no one will ever sell you or trade you or tell you you're worthless. I promise." One little girl, maybe 7 years old, tugged on Clara's skirt. "Are you an angel?" she asked. Clara smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who remembers what it's like to be you." The town's reaction was mixed. Some people were grateful, others suspicious. Marcus Grimm, in particular, was furious at being cut out of the distribution. But Clara didn't care. She'd done what she came to do. She was preparing to leave, to return to the mountain and Silas, when Thomas Garrett stopped her. "There's talk," he said carefully, "about your living situation. Some people are saying, well, that it's improper for an unmarried woman to be living alone with a man." Clara laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "Then I suppose it's good that I'm not unmarried. Silas Boone is my husband in every way that matters. If the law wants to make it official, we'll ride down to Cheyenne and find a justice of the peace. But our marriage doesn't require anyone's approval." She mounted her horse and looked down at the banker. "Tell anyone who asks that Clara May Boone sends her regards. And tell them that the obese girl they traded for Flower is worth more than all of them combined, because she learned that worth comes from inside, not from what others say." Then she rode out of town, leaving Dust Vale behind forever. The return journey took longer. Summer storms made the trails treacherous, and Clara was in no hurry. She knew what waited for her, knew it with the certainty of coming home. But when she reached the cabin, Silas wasn't outside to greet her. She found him inside, sitting by the fire. He looked older, frailer, and she realized with a sharp pang that the winter would be hard on him. "I wondered if you'd come back," he said quietly. "Always," Clara said, kneeling beside him. "I promised, didn't I?" "You could have stayed down there, started a new life. You didn't have to come back to an old man in a cabin." Clara took his hands. "Silas Boone, you listen to me. This is my life. You are my life. I don't care how many years we have, 5, 10, 20. I'll take whatever time we're given and be grateful for it." Silas pulled her close. "I love you," he whispered. "God help me. I love you so much it scares me." "Then be scared with me," Clara whispered back. "We'll face it together." They settled into their life again, but with a deeper understanding. Silas taught Clara everything he knew, determined that she would be able to survive after he was gone. She learned to hunt, to track, to read the land in all seasons. She became so proficient with a rifle that she could shoot a rabbit at 100 yards. But they also learned to cherish the small moments. Morning coffee watched together in companionable silence, evening walks through the meadow, nights spent reading poetry by firelight. Silas's body was failing, but his mind remained sharp, and Clara treasured every conversation, every story, every piece of wisdom he shared. 5 years passed, then 7. Silas defied everyone's expectations, including his own, but Clara could see him fading. His hands shook when he worked. His breath grew short on even small climbs. His face grew gaunt despite Clara's best efforts to keep him fed. One evening, in their 8th spring together, Silas asked Clara to take him to Silver Dove's grave. She helped him onto his horse, and they rode slowly to the meadow. The wild flowers were in full bloom, painting the ground in shades of purple and gold. "I need to tell you something," Silas said as they sat together in the grass. "About what comes after." "Don't," Clara said, tears already starting. "Hush, listen." He took her hand. "When I'm gone, and it won't be long now, we both know it, I want you to keep living, really living, not just surviving. Travel if you want. Find someone new if love finds you. Don't make this cabin a shrine to our marriage. Let it be a home, a place of life and joy." "How can you ask me to—" "Because I love you," Silas interrupted gently, "and because you taught me that love isn't about possession or permanence. It's about cherishing what you have while you have it. You gave me 8 years I never expected to have. 8 years of happiness I didn't think I deserved. Now I'm giving you permission to be happy after I'm gone." Clara cried against his shoulder while he stroked her hair. When she could finally speak, she said, "I'll live, I promise. But you'll always be with me, you and Silver Dove both. You're part of who I am now." Silas died 2 months later, in his sleep, holding Clara's hand. She buried him in the meadow beside Silver Dove, exactly as he'd requested. She carved a simple marker: Silas Boone, husband, teacher, liberator. He bought freedom with gold and gave love without price. Clara grieved hard, but honestly, allowing herself to feel the loss without drowning in it. She stayed in the cabin through that winter, keeping the fire burning, maintaining the trap lines, surviving in the way Silas had taught her. But as spring returned and the meadow bloomed again, Clara realized she needed to do more than just survive. She needed to live the way Silas had wanted, with purpose, with generosity, with love. She began riding down to Dust Vale once a month, bringing meat and furs to trade. She used the money to continue supporting the orphanage and the relief fund. She took in a young Shoshone girl whose family had died of fever, teaching her the skills Silas had taught Clara. She became known throughout the territory as the Mountain Woman, fierce, kind, and utterly incorruptible. Years later, when people asked about her past, Clara would tell them the truth. She'd been the obese girl traded for a sack of flour by her own father. She'd been bought with a wagon of gold by a mountain man who saw her worth when no one else did. She'd learned to love and be loved, to fight and survive, to forgive and grow. "But the most important thing I learned," she would always conclude, "is that your worth isn't determined by how others see you. It's determined by how you see yourself and who you choose to become." And every evening, as the sun set over the Absaroka Mountains, Clara would light the fire in the cabin. The smoke would rise into the twilight sky, a signal that someone was home, that life continued, that love, once freely given, never truly dies. The fire still burns,